Part 2. If you haven't listened to Part 1, please follow the link in the description. Enjoy. Hi everyone. I just wanted to make a quick update as promised, because Faye and I are flying back to California shortly. Faye is back to normal, feeling great. I watched her eat a huge plate of chicken parmesan yesterday. The first thing I should mention is that Faye's father was very reluctant to talk about the cabin, or the weird experiences we'd had there. He kept trying to change the subject, and was generally in a bad mood, which is pretty normal for him. He's a really grumbly Vietnam vet, and has been in the army since he was young. His personality is exactly the way you'd imagine it. Faye asked him bluntly, "If something is wrong with that cabin, why would you let us go up there in the first place?" And his response was, "Talk to your mother." Over the weekend, my fiancée and I stayed up in her parents' cabin up in Pikes Peak, Colorado. I made a post about the disturbing events that transpired over the course of a few nights. Many people have messaged me for an update, but I stopped responding because things have gotten worse since we returned home to California. I feel it's time I say what's going on here. Sorry, but this is long, but I want to document everything. Faye and I flew back from Colorado on Wednesday afternoon. She slept the entire flight, despite the noise, which amazed me. I can't sleep on planes. I'm absolutely terrified of flying. I'd rather stay another night in that cabin than fly. When we got home, I ordered a pizza and she wolfed it down. Her appetite has returned in full force, which is great news. I mentioned this in my original post, but Faye has an undiagnosed sleep disorder. She has pronounced night terrors, sleep talking, and occasional sleepwalking. This disorder lies dormant 90% of the time, but it tends to flare up when she's under a lot of stress. If we're moving, if she's changing jobs, or if a relative dies, I can expect a night of horrifying talking and odd behaviour. Needless to say, our experiences at the cabin have set Faye on edge. Although she's in high spirits, she's still afraid at night, and I am too. That night, after pizza, she fell asleep on the couch while we watched Wedding Crashers. At around 10 p.m, the movie ended, and I turned the TV off. As I brought our plates to the kitchen, I passed by the stairwell and heard a faint noise from upstairs that sounded like a man sighing. I shrugged it off and woke Faye up. We brushed our teeth and went to bed. Faye talked in her sleep a lot that night, and it started about 1 a.m. I woke up to her calling out, "What did you do? Do you need help?" This isn't really unusual for her. She babbled occasionally and said a few funny things. I woke up again around 4 and heard her talking, but this time, she was doing something she's never done before. We've been together for almost 5 years, and not once has she ever whispered in her sleep. But now, she was whispering, with her back turned to me. For a second, I thought someone was laying on the floor at the edge of her bed talking back to her. This disturbed the shit out of me, so I sat up and leaned over her, trying to listen in the dark. The only thing I heard her say discernibly was, "Shh." I asked her, "Faye, what are you talking about?" She didn't respond. I said, "Who are you talking to?" And she replied, "Don't," and nudged me. Another unusual thing happened at about 5:45 a.m. I woke up to Faye getting back into bed. She hurried into the bedroom from the hall and got back into bed quickly, making zero attempt not to wake me. First of all, Faye does not get up. Ever. She sleeps like a dead horse, and even if she went to the bathroom in the middle of the night, which she never does, the bathroom is not down the hall, it's in our bedroom. When I asked her what she was doing the next morning, she claimed not to have any memory of it. I spent all day Thursday thinking about why Faye was still acting weird. I was the one who found the dream catcher, and I got close to it. I was the one who interacted with the voices at the cabin. And then I remembered something. On our last night in Colorado at her parents' house, Faye got back into bed around the same time, 5:45 in the morning. I barely remembered because I was half asleep, but the image returned to my head. She'd been getting up really, really early for a few days. So, last night, I set my phone's alarm to vibrate, and I put the time to 5:45, in the middle of the night. Faye started talking again. This time, she was doing the same thing she did at the cabin, changing her voice to sound like someone else. In 5 years, she sleep-talked a bunch, but has never whispered or changed her voice until recently. She said a few things, which I tried to commit to memory. La la la. Dayon. Dayon. He's still in the trees. Where were you? I looked for you. And, ooh, it's time. About the same time, I heard a noise outside, which sounded like an old man grumbling to himself about something. We lived in North California, in a really woodsy town, so when you look out of our bedroom window, there are tons of trees across the street. It was very dark, but I'm fairly certain I saw a man walking behind the first line of trees. He was too far away to be the one grumbling, but it is unusual to see anyone over there at this time of night. In fact, I've never seen anyone out there at night, ever. Looking outside required me to open the curtains, which lit up our room with moonlight. When I looked back at the bed, Faye was lying there with her neck craned towards me, her eyes crazy wide, and fixed on me. Her mouth was open. She issued this really frightening, gurgly, drawn-out groan, and flicked her tongue around. It looked like an epileptic fit in slow motion. Faye has definitely opened her eyes in her sleep, but never like this. She looked like a fucking murderer. I got so scared I called her name out really loud and woke her up. She was confused and asked me why I was at the window. I lied and said I was just closing it because it was cold. I didn't want her to know I'd heard a voice. We talked a bit, but I'll skip that because this is getting long. My alarm woke me up at 5:45 in the morning. There I laid, awake, waiting for Faye to get up, like she had been the past few nights. She breathes very rhythmically when she's asleep, so I can always tell how deep she's under. At around 5:20, she sat straight up, swung her legs around out of the bed, and tiptoed down the hall. I followed behind. When I say that my fiancé tiptoed, I don't mean like a child on Christmas Eve. This was robotic. Alien. Inhuman. She moved like a meth-addicted ballerina zombie down the hall and stopped at the stairwell. Her breathing never changed. I just stood there, in our bedroom, poking my head out into the dark hall. Faye looked down the stairs, still standing rigidly on the balls of her feet, swaying to and fro slightly. She did some weird shit. She touched her face slowly for several minutes, touched the banister, the wall, flicked the light on and off a few times, all the while maintaining her perfectly regular coma breathing. Then, she reached an arm out in the motion of a bicep curl, stretching her fingers and wiggling them, and curling them, her hand and her arm back up to her face. I watched her do this motion for about 4 minutes. It looked like she was testing the limb, as if she'd never used it before. But then I realized she was actually communicating with someone on the first floor of the house. She was making a come here motion. With full confidence that Faye was sleepwalking, I walked into the hall and leaned over the half wall that overlooks the living room. It was totally dark down there. I couldn't see anything but the clock on the cable box. Faye stood there, waving, smiling, making gestures, and then touching her face and pulling gently on her hair. I carefully ushered her back to bed and talked to her softly, trying not to wake her. She didn't resist. She never does. and went back to sleep without another word. I have zero clue what the fuck is going on. I told her this morning what she did. Now we have a doctor's appointment for her at 3 p.m. today. Update. I took Faye to see her doctor yesterday, and we hesitantly explained what was going on with her. I left out the paranormal stuff because I didn't want to get put in a ward. She seemed really concerned about Faye, ordered a blood test, gave her a physical, asked her about her diet and drugs, medications, etc. Faye and I are both non-drinkers, non-drug users, and neither of us are on medication. She wants Faye to be evaluated by a psych next week. For now, she gave her a sedative at night and some anti-anxiety medication. She wants us to get some fresh air and get out of the house, so we're going on a hike today. A Redditor brought up the possibility that the child's voice outside the cabin asking,
"When do we go inside? When do we go inside?"
might not refer to inside the cabin, but rather inside Faye. This really worries me, because it corroborates some of the strange behaviour she's been exhibiting in her sleep. I contacted the park ranger, who is pretty sympathetic to our situation, and he's going to get in touch with some of the members of his tribe who have experience with spiritual guidance and medicine. He is convinced that Faye and I have attracted the attention of the ones who come out of the mines. Lucky us. More on that later. Some Redditors have recommended that I test Faye to see if it's really her. So yesterday evening, against my wallet's advice, I took her to our favourite steakhouse. I only ever order one meal from there. Medium tri-trip, house macaroni and cheese, and a bottled root beer. Faye only ever orders one meal there too. The barbecue chicken sandwich with mac and cheese, and a salad with ranch dressing, with a Coke. She drinks Coke only, her blood is mostly Coca-Cola. Faye took a long time deciding what to order, and ended up ordering a fucking New York strip. I jokingly told her to order for me too, and she said, "I don't know what you want." She also ordered water instead of Coke. Usually we have arguments over how much Coke she drinks, and how I'm always trying to get her to hydrate better and just drink water. This was really unsettling to me. At the end of the night, when we were walking back to my car, I kissed her temple and asked if she still liked it when I called her Noodle. She said, "Of course." I've never called her Noodle in my entire life. Her nickname has always been Monkey Toes. Long story. When we got home, she cracked open a Coke and got on Facebook, which is completely normal for her. This threw me off. One thing that's been on my mind lately is the song the little kid was singing outside of the cabin. For those of you who don't know, in the middle of the night at this cabin in Colorado, we heard a child's voice coming out of the forest singing an eerie song. I've been catching myself humming it almost every day. I asked Faye if it meant anything to her. I sang it to her while she was sitting on the couch. After a few repetitions, she sort of went blank, like she was hypnotized, and just wobbled back and forth ever so slightly for about 8 seconds. Then she snapped out of it and said, "I don't remember that." Last night is when shit hit the fan. I haven't gotten a full night's rest in over a week now. It's starting to make me feel over-emotional and crazy. Faye started murmuring in her sleep around 1 as usual, but I couldn't understand much of it. She sat up in bed, took the sheets off her legs like she was going to get up, but I grabbed her arm and asked her what she was doing. She said, "Tell them to leave." Her eyes were completely shut. I asked her who? Who needs to leave? She sat there for about 2 minutes, not speaking, just sitting straight up. I asked again, and she replied, "There's a man at the door." Then about 10 seconds later, and a woman at the bottom of the stairs. Of course, this made every single hair on my entire body bristle. I got up and went downstairs, turning on every single light as I went, carrying my buck knife with me. Nobody was in our house. I looked in every single room downstairs, even in the backyard. When I got back to the stairwell, I heard someone stomping around upstairs. Someone had turned the light to the upstairs hallway off. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up, trying to listen, but the noises stopped. So I walked back up into our bedroom and got back into bed. It was likely that Faye had gotten up to go to the bathroom or sleepwalked a bit in the room and then went back to bed. I fell asleep pretty fast, but woke up again only a few minutes later. Faye was gone. I heard movement down the hall, so I looked out into it, and I saw Faye coming back out of the other bedroom. She staggered down the hall toward me, then stopped, turned around, and walked back in the other direction. She did this 7 to 8 times. She was walking in almost the same way as the night before, standing really high up on her toes, her legs totally rigid, like they were made out of cement, and her arms completely limp and flopping back and forth. It was extremely fucking terrifying, seeing her move like that. She was totally graceless. It was like someone was testing out a human body for the first time. At the same moment, I heard a noise through the bedroom window and ran over to check, thinking someone was really at the front door. Off in the distance, about 30 yards out, somebody was walking back and forth the exact same way Faye was. He was humming loudly and intermittently singing. The song sounded like the one I sang to Faye earlier, the one the child sang outside the cabin. Basically, I ran back into the hall, woke Faye up, and brought her downstairs. I opened the front door to get a better look at the man, but he was gone. Today, at the behest of a few Redditors, I asked Faye if she'd ever been to that cabin before we visited it. I don't know why I never thought to ask her this before. She had said nothing about it when we stayed there for several nights. She was hesitant to answer me, and eventually admitted that she'd been there once before when she was 14 years old. She and her parents went snowshoeing up the mountain. A few hours later, I emailed her mother and asked the exact same question. She told me Faye had gone to the cabin multiple times as a child, but stopped going when she went to high school. I can't figure out which one of them is lying to me. Because so many people have questions about Faye, she has agreed to do an interview. If you post questions for her, I'll get her responses and post them here with a few days. I haven't told Faye this, but I'm thinking of going back to the cabin and meeting with the ranger. He wants to do some ritual with the dream catcher we found, if it's still there, and he says he'll bring his friends to try and cleanse the house and the surrounding area. This will cost me like $500 just to fly out there, but if this shit gets any worse, it might be worth it. I cannot tell you how much all of your support has meant to us over the past few days. Faye feels so good knowing that people are constantly asking about her health. I feel like a few of your suggestions have literally saved our life. So thank you, from the bottom of my heart. I don't even know where to begin. So much has happened in the last 2.5 days. The sedatives and anti-anxiety meds the doctor gave to Faye work during the day, and she's been less stressed. However, at night, her behaviour is still highly unusual. I have taken the overwhelming consensus of Redditors seriously. I went out and purchased a bunch of childproofing materials for the house to prevent Faye from harming herself or going outside while sleepwalking. I couldn't afford a bunch of cameras, sorry, I'm a teacher. I bought these knob covers that little kids and hopefully sleepwalkers are too stupid to figure out. The covers in case she tries to jam anything into them, and I hid the kitchen knives. I also bought a spiritual healer after very carefully searching for one. It is my opinion that 99% of them are frauds and hucksters, but this woman didn't charge us a thing, and she was recommended by a close family. She's the daughter of a Shoshone tribal elder. The long and short of it is, she believes our house is not haunted. However, she says that Faye feels very off. She said she couldn't get a good read on her at all, and that there is, quote, a dark cloud over her, unquote. Still suspicious of this woman, I took her to a random upstairs window, told her I'd seen something outside near the edge of the woods, mimicking Faye sleepwalking, which was true, but I pointed out the wrong window to the wrong part of the forest. She quietly examined other windows upstairs and said that our bedroom window, the correct one, gave her a terrible feeling. She said, "He watches from here. She can hear him whispering at night." We told her everything. She was horrified by our story. The look on her face unsettled me so much. It was like she'd never heard of anything this bad. She went out of the room and had to collect herself downstairs. The woman prayed for several minutes, sang a beautiful song in a language I can't even begin to describe, and saged our entire house. She put some kind of crushed herbs on the ground in front of the 2 doors that led into our home, and then she told me, in private, "You are dealing with the Hollow Ones." She said its name in her ancestral language, but I can't even come close to remembering or spelling it. She said that one is infatuated with Faye and will do absolutely anything to get inside our house, but the process takes time. I don't know if I actually buy any of this, but at least she didn't sell it to me. We also had Faye take a pregnancy test, as recommended by many Redditors. The woman said it was a good idea. Good news, not pregnant. And the woman stood in the bathroom with her like a prison guard so she couldn't fuck with the test. We then thanked the woman, and she left. That night, we attached a little jingle bell from Faye's Christmas-themed lingerie to a hair scrunchie, put it around her ankle. I'm such a light sleeper, there's no way she'd be able to get out of bed without waking me. Faye fell asleep really fast due to the meds, out like a light in a few minutes. I lay in bed thinking about the 5 she wrote on the window in her sleep a few nights earlier, and reasoned that it meant 5 a.m. and not 5 days as some had speculated. This makes sense because she's been getting up at that time to sleepwalk every night for 4 nights now. Since the 5 was written backwards, facing the backyard, I reasoned that it was a signal to whoever or whatever was out there. She was going to try and let it inside. I eventually fell asleep and I had a fucking horrifying dream. Something came into the house, through the sliding glass door to the yard, and walked up the stairs and into our bedroom. It sat at the edge of our bed, rubbing Faye's foot and staring at us. It was completely wreathed in shadow. I couldn't see it at all, except for a silhouette. I woke up soaked in sweat and I couldn't fall back asleep for a while. 5 a.m. rolled around and the reliable little jingle bell woke me right up. In her sleep, Faye did something she's never done before. She stood up on the bed, rigid as a board, and stared out of the window. I shouldn't really say stared, because her eyes were closed, but she was alert, watching, listening. She remained there like a statue for at least 5 minutes. I also didn't move, I just watched. Then, she slowly raised her hand and started waving at someone outside. My skin crawled when she did that. She definitely knew someone was there, even with her eyes shut. Faye then stepped off the bed and darted to the bedroom door, trying to get out into the hallway, but the childproof knob cover stopped her. She couldn't figure it out in her sleep. She did another thing she's never done while sleepwalking. She got extremely angry, started pulling on the cover. She shrieked and growled like a trapped animal. After about 30 seconds of this, she woke herself up. She started crying really hard and told me that in her nightmares, she'd seen a man without a face walking through the halls of our home, whispering her name and looking for her. I sat up and talked with her for an hour, and then we went back to sleep. When I woke again, it was around 10 a.m, and Faye was gone. The bedroom window was open. As I walked downstairs, I saw her in the backyard, reading. Every single window in the house was open, and it was like 55 degrees outside. She told me the smell of sage made her nauseous. She wanted to get it out of the house. I couldn't smell anything. I suggested that we go to the church downtown today to speak with a priest. She's Catholic, but she refused. So, I had my buddy Kay, who is a very, very devout Catholic, come over with some holy water and his crucifix. Apparently, Kay told his priest what was going on, and the guy very reluctantly blessed the water and told us to call him. Faye was irritated that I'd done this without her permission, and waited outside while Kay set up a few little crosses and his big crucifix around the house. Faye refused to have any holy water put on her. She kept saying, "I'm freezing, don't you dare." She's gonna be super pissed when she finds out I put that shit in her shampoo and conditioner bottles. She was in a really nasty mood all morning, but after we went out for lunch, she was feeling better, and agreed to film an interview video and answer questions from Redditors. While filming, I noticed that she wasn't wearing her engagement ring, and realised that she hadn't been wearing it in several days. I asked her where it was, and she said it was in our luggage, which we've now only partially unpacked. Later, when I checked it, it wasn't there. I'm worried about this for a few reasons. I'll post the video as soon as she watches and approves it. She's self-conscious. Expect it within a few days. I've finally begun moving some more of the photos from the cabin onto my laptop too. I can't bring myself to listen to those voice recordings yet. Since this is getting over long, flash forward to last night. I got up about 1 AM to pee, and I knocked the bell scrunchie off the bed. They had taken it off and was gone. I got angry and scared at the same time. I found her sitting on the stairs, looking down into the dark, spreading her arms open like she was trying to get a child to climb the staircase for the first time. She was smiling, with her eyes closed. As I usually do, I gently got her up and walked her back to bed. When I laid down next to her, she leaned over. With her eyes still closed, she said, "They're gonna kill you," and then licked my face. I called her parents today to arrange a flight back to Colorado. They're paying for it. Her mum, Laura, admitted to me that something had happened to Faye as a child at the cabin. That is where her sleep disturbances started when she was 5. I have had enough, and they can tell. They spoke with the ranger at Pikes Peak again. He's arranging for me to meet with him and his buddies from their tribe, who knows the entire history of the area, and all of the hauntings that other visitors have reported. Faye will be staying with my 2 best friends, R and J, and J's fiancée, A. I've known all 3 of them since high school, and they're completely informed about all these events. They will guard her with their lives. In short, I'm going back to the cabin alone. I'll update soon, but no matter what happens, I'm not going to drag this out any further on this Reddit. I've polluted this place enough with my problems. Edit. Folks, I won't be at the cabin alone. I'm meeting the ranger and his friends there. His 2 friends are from the tribe. Nation? Sorry, I don't know the correct terminology, and they are healers. They know all about Pikes Peak and the ongoing situation. I'm not going out easy. Update. Drop Faye off at my friend's place. They'll take care of her. Heading to the airport now. No idea when I'll get back on. I'll try tonight if I'm not too tired after landing. Update. I'm at Faye's parents'. Exhausted. Talked to her parents extensively. Got word from my friends. Faye started feeling really ill and wanted to go home. They've moved the whole posse over to our house, which has been saged, blessed, protected and covered in holy water and crucifixes, and she is allegedly doing much better now. Richard and Jason's fiancée Allison, are all sleeping over for a few nights to ensure Faye is okay. I'm heading to the cabin tomorrow to meet the ranger. Update. Spotty bullshit Wi-Fi, snowing like crazy up here. Met with the ranger, investigated the cabin. Nothing unusual inside except a lampshade removed from a lamp, which he claims was not like that when he came in here a few days ago. His friends will be here tomorrow morning. I'm alone for tonight. I went outside for just a minute when it was still light to grab some things from the truck and heard 2 voices. Update. So much has gone down. I'm so terrified and sleep deprived. I'm writing a huge post right now with everything that's happened. I will post it tomorrow morning because I know I can't finish it tonight. I'm gonna fall asleep in my chair. Sorry to keep you waiting. Update. It has been a really interesting few days. I have so much to say. I'm gonna try and be terse. Sorry that it's taken so long to report. I really am trying. All your questions and analysis of these events have really helped us through this struggle. Some of your observations are what brought me back here to Colorado. I landed in Denver International Airport 2 nights ago and stayed with Faye's parents in Arvada. While there, we all sat down and I basically forced them to tell me what was going on. A Redditor pointed out that Faye's mum appeared to be lying or hiding something. Another Redditor asked me if Faye had ever been to the cabin before, since her family owned it for almost 3 decades. I'd never even thought of this. When I asked Faye, she said no, and that her parents just used it as a getaway a few times a year. Faye's mum told me that she'd been there multiple times when she was little. This time, Faye's parents told me a different story. They claimed this was the truth. Faye had been to the cabin as a toddler a few times. When she was 5, something happened to her. While Greg, Faye's dad, and Faye were outside playing in the snow, Faye had wandered off towards the edge of the forest to look in. She was following a voice. Greg was building a snowman and keeping his eye on her. They were only a few dozen yards apart. Allegedly, Greg heard Faye talking, answering questions, but he couldn't hear anyone else talking. He started walking towards her to bring her back, and he heard her say,
Faye. No, it's Faye. I can't see you.
A moment later, little Faye began shrieking and crying. She went stiff as a board, and Greg had to pick her up and haul her back inside. She was almost catatonic and would go through bouts of total silent or inconsolable hysterics for several hours until Greg and Laura decided to go back down the mountain and take her to a hospital. Greg claims he never saw anyone in the woods and never heard any voices speaking to Faye. The doctors thought she had an epileptic seizure, and to this day, Faye does not remember ever going to the cabin. When I took her, she acted like she'd never seen it before. I believe that if Faye did remember being traumatized as a child, she'd never want to go back. So I really think she's blocked out the whole experience. And when we visited a few weeks ago, she thought it was her first time going. In Laura and Greg's subsequent visits to the cabin without Faye, Greg experienced terrible nightmares in which dead people entered the bedroom and sat on the ground and bed, watching him sleep. In the morning, Greg let me borrow his truck but refused to go to the cabin with me. He told me when I left,
"We let you kids go up there because we honestly wanted to believe there was nothing actually wrong with the place."
they used us to validate their denial. But I don't hold them responsible. I'd never have believed any of this if I were them. Dreams in a frightened child do not a haunting make. I arrived in Pikes Peak around 1 p.m. yesterday, and the ranger met me at the cabin. We investigated the place, didn't find anything unusual, except that a single lampshade had been removed from one of the lamps and placed on the couch. We checked out the nearby woods. I was kind of surprised to discover that the creepy, enormous dream catcher was still there. The ranger told me he didn't recognize it and was not something that his people made. He told me not to mess with it until his friends showed up. He told me he'd return with them in the morning and left. That night, some shit happened. Greg told me he'd hidden a .357 Magnum in the closet, so I retrieved it in a really dope-ass purple bathrobe, and I felt a little better. Don't worry, I know how to shoot and how to keep it safe. Right around sunset, I walked out to Greg's truck to grab a few things I'd neglected to bring in earlier, and I heard 2 distinct voices chattering in the woods. It was snowing like crazy, and the wind was howling, but above the storm, I heard a gruff, masculine voice and a younger, adolescent male voice. They were both yammering in incomprehensible gibberish from two different places. I hurried up and went back inside and locked the door. The stuff they were saying was pure madness. It made no sense.
Put them up. Up there, in the trees.
And
Take and take. Walk on down there. Go ahead.
I just sat there, imagining psychotic cannibals jabbering with their tongues hanging out and eyes rolled back in their skulls. I figured they'd come out of the woods as soon as it was dark. I tried to reach out to Faye back home, but my phone wouldn't get any reception in the cabin. The storm was too strong. And I tried to play video games on the SNES, but I was so distracted by all of the sounds outside. Every single noise the blizzard produced caught my ear, and so my imagination manifested all kinds of horrifying creatures slinking around out there in the dark. When I finally went to bed, the wind died down a bit, and I heard a few more voices. There was a distant, high-pitched wail that echoed across the entire mountain. There was a child crying, saying something like,
Put me down in the hole.
It's so deep.
You can crawl forever.
but his voice sort of glitched. It would suddenly become deeper, as though a grown man were doing an impression of a little kid. I also heard someone hacking and vomiting and crying, begging for help. I didn't fall for any of it. I'm 28 years old, and this is the most afraid I've been in my entire life, even with Faye walking around like a fleshy marionette and calling out to a presence in the dark of my own home. Around the time I was getting into bed, approximately 1:45 in the morning, there was a gentle tapping sound on the window in the living room. It was soft, like a neighbour who was reluctant to bother me. I stood there in the bedroom, the door open, holding my breath, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. Then I heard it again, so I crept down the short hall and peeked around the corner, just in time to see a figure walking past the windows and towards the front door. With the curtains drawn, I couldn't make anything out but a big shadow. Then it knocked on the door. It was a gentle knock. A man's voice called out softly.
Hello?
I listened intently and tried to keep silent. Eventually, he knocked again and said,
Hello? I need to speak with you.
He was speaking through clenched teeth. He was either extremely cold or extremely angry. I very carefully stepped back into the bedroom to grab the gun. But the goddamn place is so old the doors creak. I barely tapped the bedroom door as I passed, and it squealed like a dying pig. The man outside said, just above a whisper,
I know you're there.
For just a moment in my lethargy, I considered the possibility that this was just one of the ranger's friends, or maybe someone else who lived out on the mountain. I was never going to open the door, but stupidly, I figured talking to it couldn't hurt. I say it because I immediately stopped believing there was a human being on the other side of the door the moment I opened my mouth. I said, "Who the fuck is it?" as assertively as I could. The second I stopped talking, whoever it was out there repeated my question while mimicking my voice accurately. It sounded almost like an echo. Then he said, "May I come in, please?" His voice was a little shaky, but it definitely sounded like me. Unnervingly similar to me. But he was still clenching his teeth, so I could hear the difference. I pointed the gun at the door. It was dark in the house, so he couldn't see what I was doing through the curtain. And I said, "If you don't get the fuck out of here right now, I'll blow you in half." For those who don't know what a .357 can do to a person, a slug to the chest essentially makes you into a human milkshake, and that's after passing through 2 inches of oak door. We both just stood there for a dreadfully long minute. I started testing out my voice, groaning and whispering, muttering. It said a lot of things, but I only remember a few of them. What's your name? What's your name? A little cabin for the weekend, for... And then a bunch of lip smacking and chewing noises. They're lying, the ones out there. La 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 la. Not singing, but just flailing his tongue around and making noises like a child would. You're alone in there, and I'm not alone out here. What's your name? And you go up in the trees or down in the hole. That's where you go. Oh, they'll find you, either way. The sound of my own voice making these horrific noises and phrases set every inch of my skin on fire. I can hardly describe the physical sensation of fright this intense. It was almost like having a bad fever, hot and cold and wet and sticky all at the same time. I shouted for it to leave and said I was armed. I considered firing off around, but that's a decision you can't take back, and my number one rule is only to fire when I'm certain I've got a target and a clear reason. I'm proud to say that I can use my voice a lot better than whatever it was that mimicked me. I'm a soft-spoken guy, but I came down like a fucking hurricane, screaming, "I will fucking kill you!" He replied simply, in a softer tone of my own voice, "I will fucking kill you." And then it went back to babbling gibberish and knocking politely on the door. After another minute or two, it suddenly stopped. The last thing it said was, "I know where she is." Then it kicked the door, and I mean harder than any human could possibly kick a door, and ran off. The boom was so loud, I couldn't believe the door didn't implode in its frame. The person or thing bounded down the wooden patio and off into the snow, and I swear on my life and honor, it sounded like a horse or some other huge four-legged animal charging off into the woods. A child's laughter rang out, and then everything was silent. Needless to say, I remained in a cat-like state of delirious paranoia for the rest of the night. The storm picked back up, and I did not hear anything else. I spent the whole night debating whether the thing at the door was talking about Faye. I tried to convince myself that it was just yammering more nonsense, like all the voices I've heard up here, but the way it spoke that sentence haunts me even now as I write this. Its voice, my voice, was purposeful and restrained. It chose the words carefully, and it knew exactly what to say. I've been thinking a lot about what Redditors have been saying about Faye being some kind of doppelganger. When I first saw the nude woman on my car, I thought it was a trick to lure me into the woods, where the voices lie. I thought the real Faye stopped me from leaving the cabin, but many of you have pointed out that the reverse could be entirely possible, given how the Faye I took home to California is behaving, given how she has failed all of my tests, and given how her engagement ring has been missing since we got home. So I sat there for hours, considering whether I should go out into the woods during broad daylight to search for my fiancée. Of course it is a stupid idea, but now I understand why people in horror movies do idiotic things. If I'm not looking for her, or for answers, why am I here? I need to know what I saw that day in the driveway. I need to know if there are many voices or just one, and I need to know how to get this all back to normal. I listened to music on my iPod, desperately tried to distract myself by reading news articles online until daybreak. Most of them wouldn't load because the gods of internet have cursed this cabin. Around 4 a.m, I got up to get some food from the kitchen, and I opened the window curtain a tiny bit to see if anything was going on outside. A ton of snow had fallen. At the rim of the forest, dozens of yards out, I could see a distant figure standing perfectly still in the moonlight. He was facing away, staring off into the darkness of the woods. I checked on him every 20 minutes. Since then, he never moved. When the sun rose around 6:15 in the morning, he was gone. I never saw his face. Update. Today, the ranger and his 2 buddies came to the cabin as promised. They were instantly likable and warm. One of them, T-Way, is a medicine man in his 60s, and he was especially cool. The other was his son, Nathan, who was probably just a few years older than me. They told me all kinds of interesting lore about Pikes Peak and surrounding areas, and then proceeded to tell me a disturbing story that they believe explains the strange activity on the mountain. For the sake of brevity, I will relay it in my next post. The ranger gave me one of his facility's satellite phones to stay in contact with him in case of emergencies. I used it to call Faye, but she didn't answer, so I called Jason and Richard, who are presently caring for her. Apparently, Faye had become inexplicably outraged after taking a shower, threw an enormous tantrum, and locked herself in our bedroom. She refused to eat for the rest of the night. Allison and Jason slept in the guest room, and Richard slept on our couch downstairs and worked late night on his commissions. He's a digital artist. He told me that around 1 a.m, the same time I had my visitor, Faye ran downstairs into the kitchen, eyes closed, and started drinking out of the sink faucet. Then she turned around and stared, eyes still shut, at Richard while he sat at the breakfast table. She said, "Felix," to which he replied, "He's in Colorado, Faye, remember?" And then she said, "We sent him there to die." And then she sat down right there on the kitchen tiles and went back to sleep. I've instructed my friends only to wake Faye if she does anything serious, so they observed my rules and got her back into bed without much of an issue. For all the crazy shit Faye does when she's asleep, at least she never gets violent. The guys put her back into bed easily enough. The next day, Allison bailed on the whole project. She said she was awake all night listening to Faye whispering through the wall. Faye told Allison about how there was a man in the house, and he was asking about her. My flight home is the day after tomorrow, so I'm gonna have to figure all this shit out real quick. I'm gonna take a nap, since it's nice and bright outside, no voices. Good night.